The air in the Cathar mess hall hung heavy with the smell of recycled nutrient paste, a bland, processed sustenance that filled the stomachs of every soldier, yet rarely satisfied their minds. A low, constant hum from the flickering screens and the distant clatter of serving droids provided the backdrop to the quiet conversations that filled the vast, metallic space. Zarthus, a Cathar legionnaire, fresh out of basic training, fidgeted with the ceremonial collar of his uniform, its stiff fabric feeling uncomfortably tight around his neck. His 3 eyes, usually bright with youthful eagerness, darted nervously across the room, catching glimpses of the older, more hardened veterans. He had heard the whispers, hushed conversations in dimly lit corners of the barracks, tales spun by those who had served on the outer rim near the newly explored territories. Whispers about the humans, a species that had burst onto the galactic scene with surprising speed and an even more surprising reputation. They were not the largest, nor the oldest, nor even the most technologically advanced, yet a strange, unsettling aura of dread seemed to follow any mention of their name, especially among soldiers. Zarthus's new assignment, posted just that morning, solidified those whispers into a terrifying reality: the human front. He was to be deployed to a sector bordering human space, a place many seasoned warriors avoided like a toxic nebula. His mentor for this new post, Gronk, a Cathar whose massive frame was a testament to countless battles and whose skin bore the faint scars of energy weapon impacts, finally motioned him over with a gnarled, multi-jointed hand. Gronk's ocular implants, usually a dull amber, glowed faintly as he stared at Zarthus, a silent assessment in their depths. "So, the human front, eh, pup?" Gronk's voice was a low, gravelly rasp, like rocks grinding together, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of countless campaigns. Zarthus straightened, trying to appear more confident than he felt, and nodded, a slight tremor running through his antennae. The apprehension was a cold knot in his gut, but a morbid curiosity, an insatiable need to understand the source of the veteran's quiet fear, urged him forward. Gronk picked up a cube of nutrient paste, examining it with a detached air before taking a slow, deliberate bite, his mandibles working with a slow, grinding rhythm. The pause stretched, making Zarthus's nerves fray even further. "You think you know war, Zarthus? You don't know war until you've faced a human. Their conflicts, they're different. It's terrifyingly different," Gronk finally rasped, his eyes narrowing slightly. Zarthus found himself leaning in, drawn by the raw honesty in the veteran's tone. The air around them seemed to thicken, the ambient hum of the mess hall fading into the background as Gronk's words took center stage. "How different, Gronk? Qua?" he dared to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. Acquiring the veteran's multi-jointed fingers, thick and scarred, flexed almost imperceptibly around his paste cube, a gesture that spoke of old pains and forgotten horrors. "Let me tell you about the siege of Zelos Prime," he began, his voice dropping another notch, becoming a low, chilling register that seemed to vibrate through Zarthus's very bones. The name itself, Zelos Prime, seemed to echo with unspoken dread. A place whispered about in hushed tones, a site of a legendary, almost mythical conflict. The humans were outnumbered 10-1. We, the Cathar Legion, had overwhelming force, superior firepower, and all the tactical advantages. Our command estimated a standard orbital bombardment, a few ground pushes, and the planet would be ours within cycles. We thought it would be a mop-up operation, a simple matter of logistics and overwhelming power. We were so wrong. From the moment we dropped our first platoons, something felt off. Their initial defenses were weaker than expected, almost too easy to breach. Our scout reports indicated their primary defensive line was breached within hours of the initial landing, and we celebrated, thinking the victory was already in our grasp. We expected a full retreat, a disorganized scramble for survival, a breaking of their lines that would allow us to sweep through their territory unhindered. But that's not what happened on Xylos Prime. That's not what humans do when cornered. And that, Sarthus, is the first lesson you must learn about them. Gronk's gaze, distant and heavy with memory, seemed to pierce through the sterile walls of the mess hall, seeing something far away and long past. Seaver, not of cold, but of premonition, snaked its way down Sarthus's spine. The veteran's words painted a vivid, unsettling picture, a stark contrast to the clean, decisive battles he had studied in the Legion's academies. He could almost hear the distant echo of battle, the shouts, the explosions, the desperate, unyielding sounds of a fight that defied all logic and expectation. The Cathar always planned for victory, for efficiency, for minimizing losses. Quotes, words suggested the humans fought on an entirely different plane, one where such calculations seemed to hold no meaning. The story was just beginning, and already Sarthus felt an icy dread curling in his gut. A mix of fear and an undeniable, growing fascination with this enigmatic, terrifying species. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the core, that his understanding of warfare was about to be reshaped by the chilling experiences of his mentor. Experiences that would surely leave their own indelible mark on his soul. The mess hall's hum seemed to grow louder, or perhaps it was just the ringing in Zarthus's own ears, a prelude to the grim tales that were about to unfold. Tales of a species that fought not just for victory, but with a horrifying, unwavering tenacity that defied conventional understanding. He braced himself, knowing that the bone-chilling stories Gronk was about to share would forever change the way he viewed conflict, and perhaps the galaxy itself. Gronk's voice, a low rumble that filled the mess hall, continued to paint a vivid and unsettling picture of the siege of Xylos Prime, a battle that had clearly left a deep scar on the veteran Cathar. Our scout reports indicated their primary defensive line was breached within hours of the initial landing. K rasped, his three eyes taking on a distant, haunted quality. We, the Catharon Legion, had celebrated Zarthos, thinking the victory was already in our grasp. We expected a full retreat, a disorganized scramble for survival, breaking of their lines that would allow us to sweep through their territory unhindered. Instead, they dug in. Not in grand, pre-built fortifications, mind you, the kind we prepare for months or cycles. No, these humans, they found their strength in the rubble, in the very dust of their ruined city, a city we thought we had shattered. They used whatever they could find, overturned transport vehicles, shattered durasteel plating from fallen buildings, even the corpses of their own fallen comrades, grim as that sounds, to create impromptu barricades. Imagine Zarthus, a wall built from desperation and the refusal to yield. Our plasma cannons, designed to cut through reinforced alloys and shatter energy shields, tore gaping holes in their makeshift defenses. But for every breach we made, they plugged it immediately. Sometimes it was with more scrap metal, sometimes with sacks of sand, and often, horrifyingly, with bodies, their own bodies. They would throw themselves into the gaps, covering their comrades, allowing others to fire over them. It was a sight that defied all Cathari military logic. We are efficient, we are tactical, we preserve our forces. They just kept coming. Their small arms fire, from weapons that seemed primitive compared to our advanced energy rifles, was unending, relentless. It was a constant buzzing. Off-ground seemed to vanish. Not a full retreat, not a surrender, but a complete disappearance. It was as if the very buildings swallowed them whole. We sent in our best urban combat units, Sarthus, specialized Cathar warriors, creatures specifically, bred and trained for close quarters engagement in dense, broken environments. They were our finest, silent hunters, capable of tracking and eliminating enemies in the most chaotic of battlefields. They vanished too, one by one. We'd send a squad into a ruined sector, receive an all-clear report, and then silence. Absolute, crushing silence. A few cycles later, we'd find them, or rather, what was left of them, often in pieces, scattered among the debris, their advanced combat suits torn open, their weapons missing or shattered. And the most chilling part, no clear weapon signature. Our forensic teams, the best in the Legion, couldn't identify what had caused the damage. No plasma scorch marks, no impact craters from kinetic rounds, no residual energy readings. It was like they had been dismantled by an invisible force. It was like fighting ghosts, Zarthus, literal specters in the shattered cityscape. We later learned they called it guerrilla warfare, a deceptive, terrifying concept. They didn't engage us directly. They knew every sewer line, every subterranean passage, every collapsed building, every hidden alcove, every shadow that stretched across the ruined streets. They had mapped their own city in ways we could never have imagined, turning it into a vast, deadly trap. They used silence as a weapon, wrapping themselves in it, becoming part of the broken landscape. And then, without warning, a sudden, explosive violence, a flash, a roar, and another one of our patrols would be gone, leaving behind only echoes and a lingering scent of ozone. They didn't just ambush. They dismantled our forces piece by piece, like a predator slowly, meticulously breaking down its prey. There was no front line anymore. The concept of a battlefront, a clear line between enemy and ally, ceased to exist. Instead, there was just omnipresent danger. Every corner turned, every doorway entered, every shadow inspected, carried the potential for instant, brutal death. Our morale plummeted. You can't fight what you can't see, and you certainly can't defeat what doesn't break. Our Cathar soldiers, who had faced fearsome creatures and vast armies across the galaxy, found themselves paralyzed by an unseen enemy, a foe that seemed to defy physical form. They reported feeling watched, hunted, even when their sensors showed nothing. Paranoia spread like a plague through our ranks. Sleep became a luxury. Patrols became agonizing tests of nerve. The once confident Cathar legionnaires, who prided themselves on their discipline and courage, started to unravel. Friend would eye friend with suspicion, wondering if a sudden movement or a strange sound was an enemy or merely the stress playing tricks. Commanders issued new orders, demanding tighter formations, constant vigilance, but it was useless. The humans moved through their own ruined city as if they were part of its very fabric, slipping through cracks, appearing where they shouldn't, and vanishing just as quickly. They used the environment as an extension of their will, a weapon itself. We brought in thermal scanners, motion detectors, sound amplifiers, everything our technology could offer to find them. But they were always one step ahead, adapting, changing their tactics, rendering our tools useless. It was a war of nerves, a silent, deadly hunt, where we, the hunters, became the hunted. Every Cathar life taken was not a glorious battle, but a silent, chilling disappearance. The city, once a symbol of human resistance, became a mausoleum for Cathar hopes. It's a place where the logical, ordered warfare was twisted into a psychological torment. And, all the while, the silence would return, a vast, echoing void, broken only by the distant crackle of comms or the nervous clicks of a Cathar's weapon safety. This was not the war we knew, Zarthus. This was something else entirely, something that preyed on our minds as much as it called our numbers. This was the war of the ghost in the ruins, and it left a mark far deeper than any physical wound on every Cathar who endured it. We thought we had them cornered, Zarthus, bleeding them dry in the ruins. Kronk admitted, his gravelly voice now tinged with a raw, undeniable hint of Cathar shame, a rare display for a veteran of his stature. The mess hall's hum seemed to intensify around them, as if the very air was holding its breath. Our command, after cycles of facing their infuriating, ghost-like tactics within the city, decided to press the advantage. They believed that while these guerrillas were a nuisance, they were also a dying ember, slowly being snuffed out. Away. We're losing troops? Yes, but they were surely losing more, isolated and without support. The strategy was clear. Consolidate our hold on the ravaged cityscape. Tighten the cordon around the remaining pockets of human resistance, and then deliver the final, crushing blow. We would systematically search every last rubble pile, every shattered building, every hidden passage, until no human remained. That Sarthus was our gravest mistake. Our arrogance, fueled by our technological superiority and overwhelming numbers, blinded us. While we were bogged down in their urban meat grinder, fighting an enemy we couldn't see. An enemy that seemed to slip through the very fabric of reality they were preparing. They had a hidden facility deep beneath the city, a place we'd completely overlooked. It wasn't a military bunker listed in our intelligence, not a command center our probes had detected. It was a network of old, forgotten tunnels, civilian shelters, canned industrial understructures, connected and repurposed by the humans. A secret heart beating beneath the death and destruction we had rained down from above. From this hidden core, they launched a counteroffensive that was as shocking as it was devastating. It wasn't a frontal assault, not a grand battle of fleets or overwhelming ground forces. No, these humans, they struck with a pinpoint precision that defied all our tactical doctrines, all our understanding of warfare. They hit our vulnerable supply lines first. Long convoys of vital materiel, stretched thin across the bombed-out plains surrounding Xylos Prime, suddenly erupted in fire and chaos. Not from direct attacks, but from small, almost invisible human teams who materialized from nowhere, sabotaging vehicles, planting charges, and vanishing before our response teams could even pinpoint their origin. Fuel tankers exploded in geysers of flame. Ammunition transports detonated with deafening roars, and medical supplies vanished, leaving our wounded soldiers without vital treatments. Then came the attacks on our command centers, not the heavily fortified main HQ, but the smaller, decentralized tactical hubs that coordinated our ground forces. One moment, a Cathar commander would be relaying orders. The next, their comms would go silent, followed by a distant explosion. Again, no clear enemy presence detected before or after the strikes. It was surgical, terrifyingly efficient. And finally, they hit our reserve forces. Thousands of Cathar legionnaires, resting and regrouping behind the main lines, preparing for their deployment into the city, found themselves under sudden, brutal assault. Not from a frontal charge, but from underground. Tunnels we had dismissed as insignificant or believed to be cleared, suddenly disgorged scores of human fighters, armed with makeshift weapons and a terrifying, silent determination, struck from within our own perimeters, creating absolute pandemonium. Our reserves, caught completely by surprise, were scattered, unable to form coherent defensive lines. The shock was immense. We were so focused on the few hundred defenders we believed were trapped within the crumbling city. The ghosts we couldn't find. We entirely missed the thousands preparing to strike from beneath us, from outside the very parameters of our engagement. Our entire tactical approach, centered on containing and then eliminating the known threats, failed catastrophically because the humans had redefined the battlefield. They didn't just adapt. They changed the rules of engagement, forcing us to fight a war we weren't equipped for, a war of shadows and unexpected fury. The Cathar Legion, renowned for its discipline and strategic prowess, found itself reeling, its grand invasion turning into a desperate fight for survival against An enemy that simply refused to play by any known rules. It was a terrifying realization. The enemy we thought we had cornered had, in fact, been setting a trap of their own, and we had walked right into it, blindly. The counterattack wasn't about winning territory. It was about tearing apart our very ability to wage war, sowing chaos, and proving that, even when seemingly defeated, humans held a dark, dangerous card up their sleeve. The air in the mess hall felt colder to Zarthus, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. As Gronk's words painted a picture of utter strategic humiliation and a chilling, unforeseen turn of events that had changed the course of the entire siege. And when they struck, Zarthus, Gronk continued, his voice now raw, carrying an edge of something akin to fear, mixed with profound respect. A rare and unsettling combination for a Cathar veteran. It wasn't with the cold, calculated precision of our own warriors. It wasn't about strategic maneuvers or minimizing casualties. The way we fight, no. It was with the ferocity we hadn't encountered before in any species, anywhere in the galaxy. Imagine Zarthus, a cornered beast, hunted and wounded, suddenly turning on his tormentors with a primal, desperate rage. That was the humans during their counterattack on Xylos Prime. Their attacks were less about gaining tactical advantage and more about sheer, unadulterated fury, an overwhelming wave of pure, concentrated anger. They charged our fortified positions, the ones we had meticulously built to withstand heavy assault, with nothing but small arms, projectile weapons that seemed laughably simple compared to our plasma rifles and improvised explosives. Crude devices fashioned from whatever they could find. We watched, bewildered, as their fighters, often bleeding, often injured, ran directly into the hail of our concentrated fire. They screamed as they fought, Zarthus, not the controlled, disciplined war cries of a Cathar charge. This was something deeper, more guttural, a sound of profound pain and outrage mingled with an absolute, terrifying resolve. Their faces, as seen through our targeting scopes, were contorted with an emotion our species doesn't possess in such intensity, vengeance. They sought not just to defeat us, but to make us pay, to suffer for every inch of their land we had defiled, every life we had taken. It made them utterly unpredictable, and therefore utterly terrifying. Our combat simulations had no data for this kind of enemy. Our algorithms couldn't process such illogical, suicidal bravery. We saw human medics, lightly armed with only pistols, standing their ground, defending their wounded comrades against our heavily armored assault units with a suicidal bravery that defied all logic. They threw themselves in front of our fire, not to die, but to buy seconds, precious seconds, for their injured to be dragged to safety. It was incomprehensible. They weren't just fighting for their lives, okay? They were fighting for something abstract, something they called honor, or home, or freedom. Words that, to a Cathar, were merely concepts, but to them, they were reasons to bleed, to die, to unleash an almost animalistic rage. Cathar legionnaires, who were accustomed to enemies breaking and fleeing under pressure, found themselves facing an enemy that only grew more determined, more vicious, the more we pushed them. Their fighting became tighter, more desperate, as if they drew strength from their wounds. Close quarters combat became a nightmare. Our superior strength and size meant little when faced with their agile, relentless assaults. They would swarm our larger units, finding weak points in armor, using their environment to their advantage, even if it meant burying themselves in rubble just to get close enough for a single, fatal strike. The sheer determination in their eyes, even as their bodies failed them, was chilling. We had anticipated a final, desperate stand, but not this. Not this absolute refusal to acknowledge defeat, this raw, explosive defiance. Our officers tried to establish order, to reorganize, but the human counterattack had plunged our forces into utter chaos. They infiltrated our lines, struck from unexpected directions, and then vanished again, leaving behind only the dead and the terrified. Their fury wasn't a temporary burst. It was a sustained, burning fire that consumed them and threatened to consume us. It was as if every setback, every loss, every wound they suffered only fueled their rage, making them fight harder, scream louder, and refuse to fall until their very last breath. This was not the measured, strategic warfare we understood. This was the raw, unbridled power of a species pushed to its absolute limits, revealing a terrifying capacity for violence and an unwavering, almost insane, will to survive and inflict pain upon their tormentors. The mess hall was silent now, Sarthus absorbing every chilling word. Gronk's recounting had painted a vivid, horrifying picture of a species that, when cornered, became a force of nature, an entity of pure, destructive vengeance. It made them utterly unpredictable, utterly terrifying, and something the Cathro Legion had no tactical answer for. The concept of vengeance as a driving force in warfare was alien to the Cathro. Those battles were about efficiency and conquest, but for humans, it was a fuel, a terrifying, inexhaustible source of power that transformed them from cornered prey into an apex predator. Gronk sighed, a sound like grinding stone, the memory clearly still fresh and painful. That fury, Sarthus, he concluded, his voice heavy with the weight of experience, that absolute, unyielding fury of a cornered animal. That's what truly broke us on Xylos Prime. Not their weapons, not their numbers, but their spirit. Gronk finished his nutrient paste. The silence that followed his last chilling words in the Cathar mess hall, more profound than any noise. His gaze, distant and heavy with unspoken burdens, was lost in the echoes of a war long past, a conflict that had redefined the Cathar Legion's understanding of battle. Sarthus, the new recruit, sat utterly still, the bland taste of his own paste suddenly bitter and metallic in his mouth, his 3 eyes wide with a mix of horror and a strange, undeniable. The veteran finally stirred, a deep, rumbling sigh escaping his multi-jointed mandibles, a sound like grinding stone as the weight of memory settled upon him once more. We eventually withdrew from Xylos Prime, Sarthus, Gronk concluded, his voice barely a whisper, thin and worn, as if the very act of speaking of it depleted him. Not because we were defeated in a grand battle, not because our lines were utterly broken in a single, decisive engagement. No, we withdrew because the cost was simply too high. They bled us dry, pup, not with overwhelming force, not with superior technology, but with an unyielding will and a terrifying, incomprehensible capacity for suffering. We had superior technology. Our plasma weapons melted their crude defenses. We had superior numbers. Our legions outmatched their fighting strength tenfold. We had superior strategy. Our tactical minds plotted every move with cold, calculated efficiency. But they had something else. Something indomitable. Something that just wouldn't break, no matter how hard we hit them, no matter how much we took from them. It was a spirit, a raw, burning core of defiance that we, the logical, conquering Cathar, simply could not comprehend, let alone defeat. Our intelligence reports, which had always been the foundation of our military success, proved useless. They couldn't quantify vengeance. They couldn't measure honor. They couldn't predict the actions of a species that valued abstract concepts above their own lives. Every Cathar soldier who returned from Xylos Prime carried that mark, Sarthus, a psychological scar far deeper than any physical wound. They had seen something fundamentally alien, a form of warfare driven by raw emotion rather than cold logic. The veteran spoke of nightmares, of the ghosts in the ruins that would appear and disappear, of the screaming charges that defied all reason. Morale within the Legion usually unshakable, had been severely fractured. The very idea of engaging humans in close quarters became a terrifying prospect, whispered only in hushed tones. Since then, the Cathar had been cautious, very cautious. Our grand expansion plans that once included the human sector have been put on indefinite hold. Our strategists spend cycles upon cycles analyzing their historical conflicts, trying to decipher the madness that drives them. They study ancient human wars, conflicts that, to us, seem utterly barbaric and wasteful, yet reveal a consistent pattern of this same unyielding ferocity. We've learned that with humans, you don't just calculate their military might. You have to factor in their sheer, inexplicable stubbornness, their capacity for self-sacrifice, their willingness to endure unimaginable pain and loss, their ability to find strength in desperation. These are the true weapons that make them formidable. We sent probes, quiet and undetectable, to observe their home world from afar. We watched them engage in their own internal conflicts, wars among themselves that mirrored the ferocity we faced on Zelos Prime. They fought with the same raw fury against their own kind over concepts like ideology or resources, things we could easily negotiate or acquire through more efficient means. It reinforced the chilling truth. This wasn't a unique response to an alien invasion. This was simply who they were. Their default setting for conflict was this unyielding, visceral struggle. Our scientists theorized about their biological makeup, their unique psychology, searching for an explanation for this seemingly irrational behavior. Was it a hormonal imbalance? Strange neural pathway? They found nothing definitive, only more questions. The enigma of human warfare remained a dark, unsettling puzzle. So, when you go to the human front to Sarthus, remember Zelos Prime? Remember the unyielding stand, the ghost in the ruins, and the fury of a cornered animal. Remember that even when they're beaten, even when they're broken, even when all logical paths to victory are gone, they might just find a way to make you regret ever having lifted a weapon against them. They will bleed, they will suffer, and they will die, but they will make you pay a price so high that victory feels like a crushing defeat. The whispers about humans, Zarthus, are no longer just whispers. They are bone-chilling tales of a species, unlike any other, a species that embodies conflict in a way that the Cathar, for all their military might, have yet to truly understand, and perhaps never will. Sarthus swallowed hard, the taste of his own nutrient paste suddenly acrid in his mouth. The cold dread that had settled in his gut had deepened, solidifying into a heavy, unsettling weight. But amidst that dread, a strange, undeniable spark of awe, a dangerous fascination, had ignited within him. He had always dreamed of glory, of swift, decisive victories for the Cathar Legion. Now, he faced a daunting prospect of confronting an enemy that defied all his training, all his expectations, an enemy that fought not just with weapons, but with an indomitable, terrifying spirit. The human front awaited, and Sarthus, the eager new recruit, was no longer just eager. He was profoundly, unsettlingly changed.